Yeah, yes, yes.
All right, then. Standing by.
Not too busy for you today, huh?
No, not too bad then. We're pretty chill. There's no security council, no stakeout. You know.
Sometimes we need a Friday like that.
We need a Friday like this one. Sounds good. Usually we have, sometimes we have crazy. A couple Fridays ago we had in the studio video messages. They come down and read in our studio teleprompter video messages. SG had like 4 or 5. The PGA came in here 4 or 5. DSG, she comes in times for 6. Wow. And she's always late. She'll make it for 2 o'clock in the afternoon. No. She,
Can you come to the studio?
you come to the studio? Oh yeah. Oh yeah. All the time. All the time. And she comes this Friday. Yeah, right. She's not here yet. Oh, yeah, so I repaired the TV. Oh, yeah, yeah, no, I know it now. Sometimes it's locked, sometimes it's not locked. But you can always get in over there. Yep, the back is, yeah. When I fix that TV.
Good afternoon. We made it. It's the end of Friday. We're getting there.
I know.
So close. Maybe
Yeah.
we could have a little small meeting.
You know,
We could have come to your office.
a long, long time ago in the 1990s, sometimes you would just have the chairs in a circle and you just like get there in a small group. Do you remember that, Edie? It was like, you know, it was a very friendly setting. I mean,
Not that it's unfriendly.
this is fine. I mean, it's comfy for you because
Yeah,
all of
exactly.
you guys
That's
get to
good.
sit.
For you. Absolutely.
I'm like the one standing person.
Don't worry, you have the power of the podium. You're okay.
Yeah.
Sure, yeah.
Oh, well, no. I'll have the guests so you'll have a good, clear view of the guest.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. I will wait for Jamil to send me that. 1 second. Thank you. Great. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. In a short while, you will hear from our guest, Lenny Kinsley, the World Food Programme's spokesperson in Sudan. She will join us from Nairobi to brief us on the situation in Al Fasher in North Darfur and about how conflict and limited access have resulted in devastating levels of hunger there. Then on Monday, our guest will be Cristina Duarte, the Undersecretary General and Special Advisor on Africa, along with Ambassador Fatima Kiari Mohammed, Permanent Observer of the African Union to the United Nations. They will brief on the 2024 Africa Dialogue Series, which takes place from the 6th to the 30th of May. Speaking of Sudan, the Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Martin Griffiths, has stressed that the killing of aid workers is unconscionable, following reports that 2 drivers from the International Committee of the Red Cross were killed by gunmen yesterday in South Darfur. ICRC said that 3 other staff were injured. For the first time since the conflict began a year ago, a UN refugee agency team reached Omdurman in Khartoum on a 2-day mission. The agency witnessed massive destruction in the city and met displaced families who told them of their struggles to get enough food as prices soared. They also lack adequate shelter, enough medicines, and education for their children. Our colleagues from the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs warned that each day the conflict in Sudan continues, humanitarian needs increase. And you've been asking me about the efforts of the Secretary General's personal envoy for Sudan, Ramdane Lamamra. I can tell you that he is continuing his engagement with the parties in Sudan, urging them to de-escalate tensions. Mr. Lamamra called on the Rapid Response Forces and the Sudanese authorities to refrain from fighting in El Fasher and Rapid Support Forces, and stressed that an attack on the city would likely have devastating consequences for the civilian population. Since his participation in the Paris conference in April, Mr. Lamamra has traveled to Chad, Ethiopia, and Eritrea for discussions with the African Union and regional leaders on the way forward. Today is the last day of the biannual session of the UN System Chief Executives Board for Coordination, which is taking place in Santiago, Chile. Yesterday, in a bilateral meeting, the Secretary General and the President of Chile, Gabriel Boric, exchanged views on the ongoing conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East and on the situation in Haiti. In the meeting, the Secretary General expressed his appreciation for the strong commitment of Chile to multilateralism and to the UN. he underlined the excellent results of the Chilean presidency of the UN Economic and Social Council, as well as the leading role of Chile in climate action and protection of biodiversity and the oceans. Following the meeting, in a joint press encounter, the Secretary General said that the CEB had discussed the Summit of the Future to be held in September. The summit, he added, represents an opportunity for the world to reshape multilateralism in order to meet the challenges of the 21st century. On the conflict in Gaza, the Secretary General reiterated that a military assault on Rafah would be an unbearable escalation, killing thousands more civilians and forcing hundreds of thousands to flee. His remarks were shared with you. And for more on the situation in Gaza, our colleagues from the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs report that on Wednesday, a convoy carrying humanitarian supplies from Jordan entered Gaza via back-to-back transfer at Erez Crossing, following inspection by Israeli authorities only at Allenby Bridge. It included food parcels, sugar, rice, supplementary food, and milk powder. Going through the West Bank, Israeli civilians offloaded and vandalized a limited amount of goods from the convoy. Once inside Gaza, local trucks carrying the assistance were rerouted by armed men towards UN premises undesignated for offloading the aid. The UN has clarified the misunderstanding with local authorities, who reiterated their commitment to respect humanitarian assistance. As of yesterday, all trucks have reached the 2 designated UN premises in northern Gaza, and distribution is ongoing. And turning to the situation in Rafah, our colleagues from UNICEF warn that a ground operation there would bring catastrophe on top of catastrophe for some 600,000 children. The agency's executive director, Catherine Russell, said that nearly all of the children living in Rafah are either injured, sick, malnourished, traumatized, or living with disabilities. Meanwhile, the World Health Organization reports that of the 12 hospitals in Gaza that are still partially functioning, 3 are in Rafah. WHO says that those facilities will quickly become non-functional if there's a military incursion into Rafah, and that a full-scale military operation in Rafah could lead to a bloodbath. Meanwhile, our OCHA colleagues say that there has been incremental progress in access to water and sanitation in Gaza. OCHA reports that renewed water pumping has benefited 4 neighborhoods in Gaza City, according to municipal authorities. This comes after the Palestinian Water Authority announced the resumption of water pumping through the Al-Muntar water line earlier this week, after 200 days of complete shutdown and extensive repairs. It is the 3rd Israeli water line to restart operations since October and can potentially serve some 300,000 people in Gaza City. However, as of this Tuesday, the 30th of April, water production across Gaza was still just 20% of the total prior to the recent hostilities. Turning to Ukraine, the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs says that yesterday, an airstrike in the Kharkiv region on a training facility where children attended sports classes caused civilian casualties, mostly of children. That's according to local authorities. The number of child casualties in Ukraine continues to increase amid ongoing attacks. According to UNICEF, 25 children were killed in the first quarter of 2024. This represents a 40% increase compared to the same period last year. Meanwhile, in the frontline Donetsk region, local authorities report several civilian casualties and damage to multi-story residential buildings following attacks in several towns today. The humanitarian coordinator in Ukraine, Denise Brown, yesterday visited the Kharkiv region, which has been heavily affected by recent attacks. She met with local authorities to discuss the humanitarian response, support for evacuees, and demining. In the first quarter of 2024, more than 190 humanitarian partners reached nearly 580,000 people in the Kharkiv region with humanitarian assistance. Our colleagues from the peacekeeping mission in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, MONUSCO, tell us that sites hosting displaced people in Lac-Vert and Mungunga, near Goma, were victims of shelling by members of the M23 armed groups, causing casualties among the displaced. The Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs says that according to medical and security sources, 12 civilians were killed and another 31 injured. As we have mentioned over the weeks, the situation around Goma is very tense. In February and March, humanitarian sources report at least 10 incidents involving explosions, resulting in 14 fatalities and 28 injuries. In April, another explosion near a site for displaced people resulted in 5 deaths. Despite the volatile situation and insecurity, we and our partners continue to provide assistance. The escalating violence in North Kivu, in the east of the country, has triggered a massive displacement of people to Goma, which now hosts over 500,000 displaced people. The head of MONUSCO, Bintu Keita, condemned the violence against civilians in North Kivu, and we urge all parties to the conflict to adhere to international humanitarian law and to protect civilians. And as a reminder, the 2024 Humanitarian Response Plan, seeking $2.6 billion, is nearly 17% funded at $430 million. On Haiti, the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs says that recent gang attacks in Port-au-Prince have driven more people from their homes. On the 1st of May, a coordinated attack by several gangs occurred in Solino, a neighborhood in the south of the capital. According to local sources, several houses were burned, and some 10,000 people fled the area. The International Organization for Migration has activated its emergency track tool to monitor the number of displaced. Food distributions to affected people are being organized, and humanitarian organizations continue to deliver life-saving assistance to people affected by the violence. Heavy rains have caused flooding in several areas of Port-au-Prince, raising concerns about the potential spread of cholera and other waterborne diseases. According to our partners, thousands of homes as well as public infrastructure have been damaged. Livestock has also been impacted, further aggravating food security and impacting the livelihoods of families who are dependent on agriculture. The most urgent needs include temporary shelters, hygiene kits, and the provision of clean drinking water. At least 11 United Nations personnel, 7 military and 4 civilians, were killed in deliberate attacks in 2023, the United Nations Staff Union Standing Committee on the Security and Independence of the International Civil Service said today. For the 10th year in a row, the UN Multidimensional Integrated Stabilization Mission in Mali, MINUSMA, was the deadliest for peacekeepers with 5 fatalities. There are more details in a press release from the UN Staff Union. And today is World Press Freedom Day. In his message, the Secretary General says that media workers are risking their lives trying to bring us news on everything from war to democracy. He calls on governments, the private sector, and civil society to reaffirm their commitment to safeguarding press freedom. And just to note that this year, Palestinian journalists covering Gaza have been named as laureates of the 2024 UNESCO Guillermo Cano World Press Freedom Prize, which honors an outstanding contribution to the defense and or promotion of press freedom anywhere in the world, especially when this has been achieved in the face of danger. Also this year, UNESCO, the UN Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, is spotlighting journalism and press freedom in the face of the environmental crisis. UNESCO reports that in the past 15 years, there have been some 750 attacks on journalists and news outlets reporting on environmental issues, and the frequency of such attacks is rising. And this coming Sunday, we will also mark World Portuguese Language Day. But first, I salute all of you for your work in promoting press freedom, and I'll turn to you for questions before we go to our guest. Yes, Edie.
Thank you for the nice words about World Press Freedom Day, and I personally hope that everybody listening stops on this day to pay tribute to all of the colleagues of all of us here and watching who have lost their lives in trying to tell the world what's really happening in hotspots around the globe.
Amen.
My question is on the aid trucks that you said were stopped by armed men. Does the UN know who these armed men are? And I'm asking because the United States says they were from Hamas.
I'm aware that there were armed men within Gaza. I don't believe it was identified beyond that. The further thing I can say about it is that there was a miscommunication, and the trucks were ultimately redirected by armed men to the wrong UN distribution points, instead of going directly to their intended destination at the World Food Program warehouse in Beit Hanun. We have clarified this with the de facto authorities, so in other words, the de facto authorities in Gaza, to ensure that this doesn't happen again. All of the goods have been subsequently accounted for and are being distributed by the UN.
Is this going to impact further deliveries of aid from Jordan via this road?
We don't think it should. This was a a minor miscommunication, which was quickly resolved, and so that should hopefully reassure all parties that we are able to conduct the process in a way that ensures that food gets to the people who need it. Yes, Anade.
Thank you so much, Farhan. Also on Gaza, you mentioned that the third Israeli water line has been able to be restarted. You said that the water levels are now at 20% of what they were in Gaza pre-October 7th. My question is, how many water lines were operational in Gaza before October 7th? And similarly, can you give us a figure, percentage, or number of the population in Gaza who now have access to water, given the third water line being restarted or reopened?
I'll need to get precise figures on that, so I'll try to get back to you.
Thank you.
Certainly, there were more than 3 water lines going in to Gaza City, but this is a major way of making sure that Gaza City itself is finally getting connected to clean water. So it is an improvement, but I'll try to get figures on how many more than 3 water lines.
And also, how many
were
people
there.
now have access to water, given the third line has become operational?
Okay, yeah, I'll ask our colleagues in OCHA. Yes.
Yes, Farhan. It's been reported that the Egyptian officials said that Israel has given Hamas a week to get the ceasefire deal done, or it will start the military operation in Rafah. What message does the UN have for Hamas and also for Israeli government?
Well, our message to both has remained the same for a while, that the Secretary General has wanted there to be a humanitarian ceasefire, the release of all hostages, and improved humanitarian access to all of those in need. And so those are what we continue to call for and continue to push for. Beyond that, as you know, we continue to reiterate that there should be no attack on Rafah. That would be a disaster for the population for the reasons I outlined even just a few minutes ago. Yes.
All right. Well, second round. Farhan, can you tell us what's going on in the talks between the United Nations and the United States and others on deliveries that will be coming in by sea on the U.S. pier that's, I believe, expected to start operations in the near future?
Those discussions are continuing. Obviously, we've made clear that it's helpful to have more ways of getting aid in, even though our preferred means in terms of efficiency is by road. But certainly, any efforts to improve getting aid in by sea will help. We are in discussions to see what we can do to work with that effort in a way that respects our own basic parameters, including the need for the independence of our operations.
We've been hearing that exact same message for days and days. What's the holdup?
If I were to suggest that, that would probably have a deleterious effect on our discussions. So right now, we're just letting the discussions proceed, and we're working with them. It's a productive atmosphere, certainly, but you understand what our basic lines on this are, and we're sticking to those. Yes, Deji.
Just a follow up on the truck delivery that went to the wrong locations. Maybe I missed something. You said that all those humanitarian aids has been delivered, right?
Yeah.
But is that were those trucks going back to the original designated place to distribute the aids, or they just go to the wrong place and then they distribute there?
They'd been directed to a different set of facilities, but UN-run facilities.
Okay.
So it's not as if we lost track of the trucks. Yeah. They just didn't go to the World Food Program warehouse where they were intended to go, and then they were redirected back to the WFP warehouse at Beit Hanun.
I mean, you went. They rerouted back.
Yes.
and
yes.
then delivered. It's not in the
Yes.
wrong location.
Yes, they went to the right location and then were delivered from there.
Since we're doing 2 rounds.
Yeah, I think everyone should get 2.
Can I
Yes.
ask a question on Haiti? A couple of
Yeah.
weeks ago, the WFP was warning that it would run out of food supplies because of limited ways to get food into Port-au-Prince in particular. Do you have an update on what the current level of food supplies are available for the WFP mission in Haiti?
I'm aware that that food is continuing to go in. It is at less than what we wanted, but certainly we're trying to get more in through that, and we'll try to provide regular updates about WFP food as they become available with us. But we'll check with them on that.
I was going to say there was a moment where they would let us know that they were like 2 weeks away or maybe 3 weeks away running out of food. Anything of that would be wonderful.
As far as I'm aware, we're not in danger of running out at this stage.
Right.
But so the World Food Program is continuing with this effort, but we'll try to get further updates from them.
Thank you.
In the coming week.
Thanks, Brian.
Okay, one more, and then we'll go to our guest.
Okay. Recently, we talked a lot about definitions. We talk about the definition of hate speech, of anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism. Today, maybe there's another one, xenophobic. President Biden, when talking in a campaign, said that America welcomes immigrants, and why China has so badly economically, why Japan having trouble, why Russia, why is India, because they have xenophobic. What is the response?
I wouldn't comment on what he said. Certainly.
But what is the definition, very definition, the UN has for xenophobia?
This is simply the dictionary definition of xenophobia, which you can be free to look up. But certainly, we believe that all of our member states should continue to uphold all of the basic standards in the UN human rights covenants, including those that involve treating all races, all nationalities with respect. And we believe that all of the member states of the UN work towards that end.
Oxford language, xenophobia, none. Dislike
or
prejudice against people from other countries. We don't have to discuss
the dictionary here, Deshi.
Yeah, I mean, is China, Russia, India, Japan dislike or prejudice against people from other countries?
I think you've heard what I've had to say on this, and that's my only comment on this. And with that, I think we will now turn the floor over to our guest. So before we hear from the spokesperson for the President of the General Assembly, we'll now hear from Lenny Kinsley, the World Food Program's spokesperson in Sudan. I believe you're talking to us from Nairobi. I'm glad that communications are up. I know that the weather there is a little bit difficult, but it's great to see you. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very, very much for having me. So today, the United Nations World Food Program is warning that time is running out to prevent starvation in Darfur, as intensifying clashes in North Darfur's capital, El Fasher, are hindering our efforts to deliver vital food assistance into the region. Civilians in El Fasher and the wider Darfur are already facing devastating levels of hunger. Yet deliveries of food assistance have been intermittent due to the fighting and endless bureaucratic hurdles. This latest escalation of violence around El Fasher has halted aid convoys coming from Chad's Kina border crossing, which has recently been opened as a humanitarian corridor that passes through North Darfur's capital. Meanwhile, restrictions from authorities in Port Sudan are preventing WFP from transporting assistance via Adre, the only other viable cross-border corridor from Chad. The route can serve West Darfur and other locations in Central, South, and East Darfur. These access constraints are jeopardizing our plans to provide vital assistance to over 700,000 people ahead of the rainy season, when many roads across Darfur become impassable. WFP currently has 8,000 tons of food supplies ready to move in Chad, ready to transport, but isn't able to do so because of these constraints. Our calls for humanitarian access to conflict hotspots in Sudan have never been more critical. WFP urgently requires unrestricted access and security guarantees to deliver assistance to the families struggling for survival amid devastating levels of violence. And we must be able to use the Adre border crossing and move assistance across front lines from Port Sudan in the east into Darfur so we can reach people in this desperate region. The recent surge in violence in El Fasher is exacerbating critical humanitarian needs in Darfur, where at least 1.7 million people are already experiencing emergency levels of hunger, or IPC4 of IPC5 on the internationally recognized integrated phase classification scale. And this is an estimate from December of last year, expected to be much higher today. El Fasher had been a relative safe haven for families, hosting many IDP camps that predate the current conflict, yet conditions were already critical, with reports of children dying of malnutrition. Now many are being forced to flee El Fasher and surrounding areas, some for the second or third time, and are becoming increasingly vulnerable. On top of the impact of the escalating violence, WFP is concerned that hunger will increase dramatically as the lean season between harvests sets in and people run out of food. I'm regularly in touch with the head of a woman farmer in El Fasher who is relatively better off than many of the existing 500,000 displaced in the city. She recently told me that her family has already run out of food stocks and is just living day by day to put food on their plates. This is an indication that the lean season, when food becomes less available, which usually kicks in this month, is starting even earlier, especially as crop production in the Darfur region for staple cereals like wheat, sorghum, and millet is 78% less than the 5-year average. Just minutes ago, I received photos from my colleagues on ground of children in IDP camps in central Darfur who are severely malnourished, elderly people who have nothing left but skin and bones. Recent reports from our partners indicate that 20 children have died in recent weeks of malnutrition in that IDP camp in central Darfur. The situation is dire. People are resorting to consuming grass, peanut shells, and if assistance doesn't reach them soon, we risk witnessing widespread starvation and death in Darfur and across other conflict areas in Sudan. Over the last 6 weeks, WFP managed to deliver emergency food and nutrition assistance to over 300,000 people in North, West, and Central Darfur using the Tina and Adre border crossings and a cross-line route from Port Sudan. These breakthroughs followed lengthy negotiations, but the progress unfortunately seems to have been very short-lived with all routes now blocked. WFP and the rest of the humanitarian community needs to be able to deliver humanitarian assistance consistently and at scale to prevent a worsening of this crisis. 1 year of this devastating conflict in Sudan has created an unprecedented hunger catastrophe and threatens to ignite the world's largest hunger crisis. With almost 28 million people facing food insecurity across Sudan, South Sudan, and Chad, the conflict is spilling over and exacerbating the challenges that we have already been facing over the last year. The window to avert this is rapidly closing, and a concerted diplomatic effort by the international community is needed to push the warring parties to provide access and safety guarantees and adhere to their obligations under international humanitarian law. Thank you so much for having me, and I'm available for any questions.
Thanks very much. I'll just turn over the floor to the reporters for questions. Edie Lederer from AP.
Thank you very much on behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association for doing this briefing. My name is Edith Lederer from the Associated Press. A couple of follow-up questions. First, does WFP, does the UN have anybody left in El Fasher or any of the aid organizations? And is there any update on how encircled the city is? And we're all hearing dire reports about El Fasher about to fall. And can you explain to us what the objections are to opening the crossings that you talked to us about, and what kind of negotiations are going on now to try and lift those objections and get more aid in rapidly? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Edith. So to your first question, whether WFP has personnel on ground in El Fasher. Right now, we are relying heavily on our partners on ground. There are some. We do have staff in different parts of North Darfur, and the situation that we're hearing from our partners on ground is extremely dire. What we understand is that the city is besieged. It's difficult for people to actually leave because it's besieged, which also puts civilians in a very, very difficult position. In terms of your question to the restrictions on the Adre border, which crosses into West Darfur and would open up routes into the rest of Darfur to the three states mentioned before, Southeast and Central Darfur. The authorities in Port Sudan closed this border on the 21st of February, citing security concerns. We have heavily been advocating directly with authorities in Port Sudan and also through an interagency mechanism led by OCHA to reopen this border. The border was reopened, that specific corridor, just on a one-time off basis at the end of March, through which we were able to support 150,000 people in a matter of weeks. And that's why it is so critical for that border to remain open, for that closure to be lifted, because just physically speaking and geographically speaking, it is much harder to transport goods from the other cross-border route that now has been opened via Tina, especially now that the fighting has broken out in and around El Fasher, which is basically would have to pass through El Fasher to get to the rest of the Darfurs using that Tina border crossing, which is further north from Chad into North Darfur. I hope that answers all your questions. I think you had one more.
Well, what I really wanted to know was who's negotiating at what level, and aside from the security concern, if the humanitarians are willing to try to go through those borders, what's the security concern that the government, which controls Port Sudan, is worried about?
So the security concern, quite frankly, is that, as you know, the paramilitary rapid support forces have taken over large swaths of the Darfur region. And so this is the security concern that is mentioned by the authorities in Port Sudan. And it makes for a very complicated situation for an impartial actor as WFP, where we do negotiate with both sides to the conflict at various levels, at the highest levels, but also on the ground. And these access negotiations, which are done in coordination with OCHA, as I mentioned, are very, very lengthy and complicated because you just have so many different actors and checkpoints on the ground across different routes in Sudan. So just one concrete example, there's one specific route that goes from East Sudan into Darfur, or would lead into Darfur. It's around 300 kilometers of road. And just the checkpoints along that road and the number of different, let's say, leaders of different not just RSF, but SAF, different armed groups we have to negotiate with for just that 300-kilometer stretch is nearing 20 different actors or 20 different individuals that need to be negotiated with, that need to be called. And then in Sudan as well, you have network cuts. So to reach the actual people on the ground also is challenging. And then thinking of the number that we have to reach to be able to communicate and negotiate that access. So it's extremely complicated. And I hope that paints a clear picture for you to understand what the challenges are operationally for us.
Just a quick follow-up. Is WFP or OCHA in contact with the rapid support forces, particularly in Darfur, and have they given a green light for aid deliveries?
Yes, so WFP as an impartial organization, impartial player, we are in touch with both parties to the conflict. And yes, we do negotiate with both parties to the conflict, and we are in touch at various levels.
Okay. Anade?
Hi, it's Anani Sicham from Al Jazeera English. Thank you for this briefing, Lenny. I just wanted to follow up on that last question of Edie. She asked, has anybody from the RSF or the SAF given a green light for aid deliveries? I think we're all trying to figure out how the cross-line negotiations are going and whether or not they're making any progress.
Yeah, so for the Tine border crossing, so there's two different border crossings. The one that I mentioned in the north, Tine into North Darfur, much further north, and the routes to move into different parts of the Darfurs from that border crossing is much more difficult. That border crossing, we have gotten the green light from the authorities in Port Sudan. And on the other border, we do not have the green light from the authorities in Port Sudan, but we do have the green light from the paramilitary forces. And so basically on this, now the Tine border, now for security reasons, we are not able to move because it would mean transporting, dozens of trucks on a route that is going directly into El Fasher, where there are reports of airstrikes, bombing, shellings, etc. So for a pure security reason, we can no longer use that border crossing to get into El Fasher, where assistance in and of itself is needed, much less to transport that further into other parts of the Darfur, which is a very, very big region when you look at the area. I hope that clarifies a bit.
It does. Thank you very much. And then I have one more question, if you don't mind. So you said that you are, I think it's 8,000 tons of aid that you have in Chad ready and waiting to go in. If by any miracle of a chance all the openings got opened, how many people would you be able to help, and for how long would that 8,000 tons last?
So actually, before the fighting broke out in El Fasher now in recent weeks, we had planned at least four, if not 5 convoys immediately in the next month to support 700,000 people, many of whom for 2 or 3 months, given the impending rainy season where we would usually pre-position food to ensure that communities that become unreachable because of the physical road conditions, when roads become impassable, would have enough sustenance for that time period during the rainy season. But beyond that, of course, we were hoping to scale up and ramp up even more. But now with these access constraints, with the security concerns, as well as these bureaucratic restrictions, it makes it difficult for us at the moment.
Yeah, Lenny, this is the Zhishu with China Central Television. Just a clarification, when you mentioned the 2 border crossings, Tina and Adre, you said that you have already get the permission to use Tina border crossing from Port Sudan authorities. But in Adre, you have the rapid force, their permission. Do you still need the authority from the Sudanese government to use Adre?
Given that the authorities in Port Sudan are considered as the government and still recognized as the sovereign state, yes, as a UN agency, we adhere to that designation unless that changes.
Yeah, and one more question. I'm sort of curious. So those authorities, no matter it's the one in Port Sudan or Rapid Force Support Force, are they aware of the state of the starvation of people, and what are the excuse they gave to WFP? Like more important than the people, security issues?
So obviously I cannot answer that directly because I do not speak directly. But I would say I cannot imagine that they would not know because these reports are so widespread. And right now, the main focus is the battles on both of the sides that the warring parties have going on. And unfortunately, those who are bearing the brunt of this conflict are the civilians.
That's it for questions. So once again, I would like to thank our guest, Lena Kinsley, the World Food Program spokesperson in Sudan. Thanks very much for your briefing, and I hope you have a good coming days over the weekend. And
thank you very much. Thank you for having me, and thank you to all the correspondents for covering Sudan. It's very important right now.
Thank you. And we will now have with us the spokesperson for the President of the General Assembly, Monica Villela-Graley.
Thank you, Farhan. Thank you, Farhan. It's nice to see you. Okay, here we are for the last briefing this week. So good afternoon and happy Press Freedom Day. I will start with a trip announcement. The President of the General Assembly, Mr. Dennis Francis, will travel to Washington, D.C. on Sunday to speak at the headliner speaker at a newsmaker event at the National Press Club building on Monday, 6 May. The PJ will use this opportunity to address the UN's role in responding to today's geopolitical challenges, highlighting the importance of a UN-led multilateral system, as well as topics related to peace and security and the upcoming Summit of the Future in September. The Newsmaker event will take place at 10 a.m. in the National Press Club's First Amendment Lounge. The PGA will start the event by delivering opening remarks, followed by an interactive session with journalists moderated by the President of the National Press Club and CNBC Washington correspondent, Ms. Emily Wilkins. Previous speakers at the National Press Club have included heads of state and government, as well as international leaders and personalities, among them Bill Clinton, Nelson Mandela, Mikhail Gorbachev, Martin Luther King Jr., Elizabeth Taylor, Muhammad Ali, and others. The PJ's delegation includes his chef de cabinet, a media advisor, and a media assistant. Travel costs to Washington, D.C. are covered by the OPJ's Trust Fund, and the event will be live-streamed on the NPC's digital channels and shared across the PJ's digital media channels. So tune in on Monday, 10 a.m. The PJ issued a joint statement to mark World Press Freedom Day, which is celebrated today. Mr. Francis co-signed a statement with the presidents of UNESCO General Conference, the Economic and Social Council, ECOSOC, and the Human Rights Council. This year, World Press Freedom Day is dedicated to the importance of journalism and freedom in the context of the current global environmental crisis. According to UNESCO, 44 journalists were murdered in the last 15 years in connection with their coverage of environmental issues. The UN agency also says that 65 media professionals were killed in the line of duty last year. In the joint statement, President Francis and his co-authors recall the freedom of information, saying that it is a fundamental human right. They condemned the killings of journalists and media workers everywhere, including in conflict situations, as well as in any attempts to harass, intimidate, attack, or arbitrarily detain journalists and media workers. The four presidents urged member states to do their utmost to prevent violence, intimidation, threats, and attacks against journalists and media workers. The PJ recorded a video message on World Press Freedom Day to be available on his YouTube channel. Mr. Francis also issued a post on his X social media account recalling the words of Mahatma Gandhi, and I quote, "Freedom of the press is a precious privilege that no country can forego." The PJ is on his way back to the United States after concluding his participation in the annual meeting of the Council of Presidents of the UN General Assembly, UNCPGA, earlier today in Doha, Qatar. Mr. Francis highlighted the importance of turning dialogue into action, rebuilding trust, and working towards a more peaceful and sustainable future. And now a couple of notes for your diaries. The General Assembly will hold a plenary meeting on Monday, 6 May at 10 a.m. under Agenda Item 63, use of the veto at the J Hall. This meeting follows a veto cast in a meeting of the Security Council held on 24th of April under the agenda item non-proliferation. And on Friday, 10th May, next week, the General Assembly will resume the 10th Emergency Special Session, ESS, at 10 a.m. in the GA Hall. This time, the resumption of the ESS was requested in a letter sent to President Francis, or to the President of the General Assembly, on 24th of April. And more information or details and updates on this meeting will be brought to you as soon as we receive them. And last but not least, finally, President Francis wishes all Portuguese-speaking peoples around the world a very happy World Day of the Portuguese Language, which is marked on 5th May by the Community of Portuguese-Speaking Countries, CPLP, since 2009, and by UNESCO since 2019. Portuguese is spoken in 4 continents as the official language of 9 countries. According to UNESCO, the most widely spoken language in the Southern Hemisphere. So, Feliz Dia Mundial da Língua Portuguesa, that's easy for me. And this is everything we have for today. Do you have anything else? If not, I would say thank you so much. I'll see you on Monday. Yeah, okay, thank you.